Hi, I'm Nadine the gluten-free RN, and today, during episode 26, we're going to talk about celiac disease in the media and what that looks like. Stay tuned. Hi, and welcome back to the Gluten-Free RN podcast. I'm Nadine the gluten-free RN. Today, during episode 26, we're going to talk about non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease in the media. A little bit of the politics about celiac disease will creep in here. But first, I'd like to thank Tim Hallowell of the Podcasting Guy for being such a superb producer of the Gluten-Free RN podcast. Thank you, Tim. I'd also like to thank everyone worldwide who is listening to the Gluten-Free RN podcast. This is really fun for me, but I really enjoy looking at where people around the world are listening. Places like Bangkok, Norway, the UK, certainly Canada, a lot of people in California and Oregon, Monaco. So just a huge shout out to everyone around the world that is listening. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Latin America, welcome. Because as most of us know, celiac disease is a worldwide healthcare crisis or issue. It can happen anywhere to anybody at any time with any symptom or no symptom, especially in people that are predisposed due to the fact that they're carriers of the HLA, human leukocyte antigen, DQ2 and or DQ8 genes. And more, we're finding the DQ7 gene is also implicated in celiac disease and might be that elusive 2 to 8% of the population that tests negative for the HLA DQ2 and or DQ8, but still has villus atrophy and clearly gets better on a gluten-free diet. That doesn't even include all of the people that aren't gene carriers for celiac disease, but they still improve health-wise on a gluten-free diet, the non-celiac gluten sensitivity people. So we're just going to include everybody because we're inclusive and we want to make sure that everybody is covered and knows enough about gluten intolerance or non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease so that they can make healthcare decisions based on information as opposed to trying to guess about why suddenly they're having all of these healthcare issues or why they've had healthcare issues their entire lives. So ideally, we would be doing a mass screening of everybody everywhere to find out at least their gene status, whether they're a DQ2 or DQ8 gene carrier, and hopefully then screen people at least yearly with a celiac antibody test. And or giving these people the option of immediately adopting a gluten-free diet because it is so preventative, not only for celiac disease, but so many other healthcare issues or problems, including and especially autoimmune issues such as MS, lupus, Sjogren's, sarcoidosis, type 1 diabetes. You get the idea. So today we're going to talk about celiac disease in the media. Why? Well, we're going to talk about it because I hear a lot of misinformation in the media. I hear certain aspects of the media trying to dissuade people from adopting a gluten-free diet. And I always want to remind people that they need to find out who the sponsors are for any print or television program that is disparagingly talking about celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or those crazy people that just want to be on a gluten-free diet. The fact that it's a fad. The reality is it's not a fad, but there are a lot of corporations that actually are dependent on people eating wheat, including the wheat industry itself. So interestingly enough, even in the United States and Canada, a full 33% of the population are either on a variation of a gluten-free diet or would consider themselves to be gluten-free at the very least. And of course, the wheat industry or the grain industry has felt that keenly over the last 10 years. When I started this 10 years ago, I predicted very early on that within these 10 years, half the grocery stores would be gluten-free, meaning that half the food in the grocery stores would be gluten-free, and the other half would be that other food that did contain gluten. And if you go out to the stores, if you're not at least seeing that trend where the grocery stores are beginning to carry many, many more gluten-free products, there's certainly the co-ops and natural grocers in our area and several other grocery store chains that are focusing on gluten-free products and really healthy products that people are able to buy without really questioning whether the product is in fact gluten-free or not. I'm including the infographic of the fact that 8 to 10 corporations own almost every company. And we saw it way back in the 80s and 90s with the organic companies. The organic companies got bought by these 8 to 10 corporations. And so very few of the organic companies are actually owned by families or the people that started them, that initiated that whole business process of developing research development and marketing a product, whether it was a cracker or a yogurt or whatever it was. So most of those companies have been bought up by these 8 to 10 corporations. You would recognize them, but I'm going to throw in that infographic, and it's updated at this point so that you understand that even the companies that you see all of the time in the grocery store and in ads, those are the corporations that pretty much fill every grocery store with product that you see. So you think you are looking at a huge array and a variation of options for buying products, but the reality is that they're not all that different at all. And most of those products in the grocery store are, again, owned by these 8 to 10 corporations. I make it a practice at this point for myself not to give these corporations any more of my money. They don't get my money if I can help it. So I'm very cautious about where I spend my money. First and foremost, I make it a practice to spend my money locally. So local companies, local farmers markets, and then I try to keep my money that I spend on food at co-ops. And then if there's a company that actually produces food locally, I will choose those products over anything that is brought in or transported from a faraway place to my grocery store. And when I do buy those products, I have a few rules. I make sure that they have 5 ingredients or less, and I'll fudge on that a little bit, but I must be able to picture what every ingredient is. So I know what a cashew is, I know what a dried cranberry is, I know what a walnut is, I know what a sunflower seed looks like, but I have no idea what hydrolyzed vegetable protein is. I don't know what it looks like, and I don't know where it comes from. And companies actually have up to 6 months to change their labeling, even if the product ingredients have changed or the sourcing of a product has changed. So corporations or companies actually have 6 months to change those labels. So even if there's a significant change in the ingredients, they don't have to declare that. They do have to legally declare allergens, but please keep in mind that barley and rye are not considered to be on the allergen list, at least not in the United States. And interestingly enough, just this week, we went to the grocery store and I was looking at pestos. And I'm very interested in pestos when I can't make my own because I don't have any basil right now. But I always look for the ones that are non-dairy. So I'm having more and more options of buying pestos that are gluten-free and vegan because they don't have any of the Parmesan cheese or they don't have any cheese added. But I actually saw one and I posted it on Instagram. If you're following me at all, you know that I have a Facebook page and Instagram. So I posted this picture of a pesto that actually declared that it had barley in it, very proudly. And so I'm like, who puts barley in pesto? That shouldn't even be legal. But anyway, this pesto had barley in it. And not only that, I did find another product. It was actually kombucha. You know, I read labels, even for products that we're supposed to assume are gluten-free. This particular kombucha had barley in it. Really? Who puts barley in my kombucha? Please don't do that. But anyway, as I was saying, it's very important that you read labels. And the fact of the matter is, I do not have a lot of time to read labels. So the labels that I read must be very clear, very concise, and I have to know what's in there at just a glance. Because as soon as I have to work too hard to read that label, I'm going to put that product back up on the shelf and I'm not even going to buy it. I'm not going to look at it again. I'm not going to pick it up. So I do try to take pictures of those products that actually have barley in them where you would least expect it. Because I really caution people about assuming that the products that they're looking at or they're buying are gluten-free. I know some people go, well, it's naturally gluten-free. What does that mean? Sure, cashews and walnuts and all types of other things are supposed to be naturally gluten-free, but there's a lot of other things that happen, whether they're contaminated in a facility that also processes wheat, or I've seen it more times than not, whoever's putting up the produce or the food is actually eating a sandwich or somehow other contaminating the food that I am assuming is gluten-free. And it can be as simple as the grill that they put the regular buns on and then they put the gluten-free buns on, or there's many different ways to get cross-contaminated or contaminated. So just be aware of that. These 8 to 10 corporations own the vast majority of the food that's available in the United States and Canada, and I would imagine worldwide. So just be aware of that. Look at that infographic. Check out, some of the products that you buy and decide where you're going to spend your money because you're very, very powerful. You get to decide where your money goes. Does it go to your local economy? Does it go to a corporation? Are you supporting a corporation who then spends that money on media campaigns to tell people not to go on a gluten-free diet or that a gluten-free diet can be dangerous, which is not true, and can really dissuade people from actually getting healthy. And it also impacts the social component of being on a gluten-free diet. So people that are on a gluten-free diet, we didn't wake up one day and go, I'm just going to try that gluten-free diet thing because it sounds like a great idea and I'd like to disrupt everyone else's life and make everything all about me. Now, don't get me wrong, I know there's those people out there, but the vast majority of us have to be on a gluten-free diet. Otherwise, we'd be dead or we'd have GI bleeds all the time. We'd be in the hospital. We'd have to take boatloads of medications for all of the symptoms that eating gluten can cause. And for myself, I like to be as healthy as possible. Number one, I'm a nurse. Number two, I had multi-system organ failure before I found out it was gluten that was killing me. And I don't have any of the health issues I had before. So I'm much healthier as a 51-year-old person than I ever was before. But if I would have listened to my doctors because my blood test and my skin biopsy were negative for celiac disease and dermatitis herpetiformis, if I would have listened to them, I certainly would have been dead. But I'm a nurse, and I decided I was going to be on this gluten-free diet anyway because it made me feel better. And then come to find out, I'm a homozygous gene carrier for DQ2.5, which means I get a gene from each parent. So I'm pretty much guaranteed to have celiac disease. I'm in the category of a super celiac, which means I get sicker and it also takes me longer to heal once I go on a gluten-free diet. That's why I quickly adopted a paleo lifestyle, which is what I'm doing now. My variation of a paleo lifestyle or a paleo diet. People get better much quicker, much more completely, and it's a cut to the chase for ridding our bodies of a lot of the bad health issues from eating wheat and grains in general. There are some countries that take non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease very seriously. Most of those countries have universal health care. So it saves the government money by identifying people very early on that have celiac disease. So in Finland, it's estimated that 70% of the people that actually have celiac disease are diagnosed. Italy and UK and Canada are pretty good, but they're still estimated to have only 30 to 40% of the population that has celiac disease diagnosed. In the United States, it's estimated that there are less than 1% of the population is actually diagnosed that has celiac disease. There is no country at this point that I'm aware of that is on this enough that they have 100% of the people diagnosed with celiac disease that actually have it or are negatively affected by grains. So we have a lot of work to do. That's why I encourage people to actually look around at yourself, your families, your friends, wherever you work, and encourage people to get tested for celiac disease. And I do recommend that everybody at least get a baseline antibody test and certainly a DNA test for celiac disease. And at that point, make an educated decision about whether you're going to adopt a gluten-free diet or a paleo lifestyle for yourself and your family. Because once you adopt a gluten-free diet or a paleo lifestyle, it tends to be a family endeavor. And I do encourage people to have 100% gluten-free home at the very least, which means that everybody in the house is, in fact, gluten-free. So you don't have to be paranoid in your own home about a breadcrumb or a dusting of flour, and people feel safe there. You should always feel safe in your own home. The other interesting thing I've heard in the media is that even celiac experts and doctors actively try to discredit the gluten-free or paleo diet by saying it's a fad or disparagingly referring to people as, this is interesting, PWAGs, people who avoid gluten. What does that mean? I guess I'm a PWAG because I actively avoid gluten. I really can't understand why people are so up in arms about people adopting a gluten-free diet without a diagnosis of celiac disease or gluten intolerance, especially when they do feel better. Not everybody has the option of getting tested, especially in the United States, where it is still healthcare for profit. So people that don't have health insurance are at a direct disadvantage from even accessing healthcare in any way, shape, or form. So to go into a doctor's office when you have all these symptoms and to even think about suggesting that you get tested for celiac disease when you have, a list of other symptoms that more urgently needs to be addressed and nobody is looking for the underlying issue or the cause of all those symptoms, you can easily see why many, many millions of people actually fall through the cracks. And in the United States, it takes on average of 9 to 15 years to get a diagnosis of celiac disease. In Italy, it takes on average of 2 to 3 weeks. Huge difference there. And during that 9 to 15 years, if ever people get diagnosed with celiac disease in the United States, they're tested for everything else under the sun because we are a for-profit healthcare system. And it must be noted, we have some of the worst healthcare outcomes in the world. It's pretty bad. So as a nurse, again, it would behoove us as an entire country to start testing people actively for celiac disease, no matter what they go to see the doctor for. So actively testing people for celiac disease and accurately testing them for celiac disease would be great. And I've said it before, and I'll say it many, many more times. One test for celiac disease does not rule you out from ever developing celiac disease. You can have a negative test for celiac disease in January, get retested in April or May, and by that time you have enough organ damage or intestinal damage or villus atrophy to actually have a positive antibody test. So again, one test will never rule you out for celiac disease proper, especially if you're a gene carrier of HLA-DQ2 and or DQ8 or DQ7. It'll take another 20 years before we're throwing the DQ7 on the gene test. So why would celiac experts and doctors actively try to discredit the gluten-free diet? I don't understand that either, because people get better on a gluten-free diet. And it's been suggested that there's a placebo effect, or even more interestingly, a nocebo effect. So a placebo effect is people have a positive expectation from a intervention. So the sugar pill example. And so people feel better when they take something or when they remove, let's just say, gluten from your diet, and suddenly you feel better. Some doctors will say, oh, that's just the placebo effect. But a nocebo effect is expecting that you're going to feel bad when you eat gluten, and then you do. But there's no apparently physical evidence that you should feel bad. So it's an interesting concept. But at this point, because our country is so far behind and our world is really so far behind from finding people with non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease, we have to be supportive of the people that are actually adopting or trying to get better, trying to be more healthy. And so if we're going to talk about preventative medicine, what does that mean? It means diet and exercise. We have to talk about a gluten-free diet at the very least, a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, and certainly a paleo lifestyle, and make sure that people understand what their options are, even in the absence of a positive blood test for celiac disease, because we know that the vast majority of those antibody tests are 70% false negative, and that's nationwide across the United States. It's because of lab-to-lab variability. It has to do with the ranges that the labs have set for positive tests. It has a lot to do with whether they are consuming gluten at the time they have the blood test or not, and many different factors. But those are the biggies. If you're ever reading a newspaper article or a magazine article or watching TV and you see a headline or a title or a caption that says anything like gluten-free diets, more harm than good, gluten-free, friend or fad, gluten-free diet, bad for gut health, gluten-free diet hype, could becoming gluten-free be bad for your health? Report, gluten-free diets are not always a good idea. Gluten-free diet may be a waste of money for some, new research suggests. Is gluten bad for you? What we're not eating, a potential danger of gluten-free. Gluten-free diet, who benefits? I look at these and I kind of laugh a little bit because really read between the lines and ask yourself always, who is sponsoring the article? Who is writing it? You can find that out. Who are the sponsors of the TV shows or the print ads in magazines and in the newspapers? Because if it's anything to do with the wheat industry, then they actually get to dictate the articles or the slant or the bias of what you read. And I never thought that was true very much, but I do very much believe it's true now. I know several people that were originally asked to be interviewed about gluten-free diets and whatnot, but then the sponsors actually got to dictate who was interviewed based on what information they would have said. So one person was not able to be interviewed because one of the sponsors was the Dairy Council, and that particular person was on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. So the information you get tends to be biased towards the sponsors or whoever is paying for that magazine or the newspaper or that TV program. I was a little disappointed when we were watching Frankie and Grace. It's one of the TV shows that's on Netflix. And trust me, I do not watch TV. We don't have a TV, but we do watch some of the shows. And I was very much disconcerted when I heard that one of the characters had celiac disease, but they actually highlighted her in a very negative way. So it makes me just want to write the producers of the show and suggest that they, number one, read my book, Donation, and number two, really think about the message that they're sending to society as a whole. And they're bashing people that can't eat what's considered to be a staple food in many parts of the world. So it just does not sit very well with me. But there are many, many products geared towards people that have health issues, especially in the United States. And when I was really sick, when I had multi-system organ failure and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, I would chase anything that was for sale that potentially would have helped me feel better. So was it a magic pill? Was it a new mattress? Was it special sheets so that my sinuses didn't bother me anymore? Was it allergy shots? Whatever it was never going to fix anything that I had, including special socks for compression, for my edema. All those things were just Band-Aids. But believe it or not, you can buy many products that are considered to be Band-Aids or props or splints for your many health issues, but they'll never deal with the underlying issue. But these companies are more than happy to take your money. So we mentioned the wheat industry earlier on, and wheat is a commodity traded on Wall Street. So there's a lot of money involved, and there's a lot of politics that goes along with that money. And we can talk about that another day. But the United States and Canada grow an enormous amount of wheat and grains, including the state I live in, Oregon. It's one of the number one export products that we have. And there was a big uproar not that long ago, and it was a worldwide issue because they found genetically modified wheat right around where I live. And that's supposed to be illegal. But I can assure you now it has been found in any state that grows wheat has somewhere genetically modified wheat growing. And you really do need to be aware of that. Number one, it is a political issue. It's a health risk, and it is illegal. The nice thing about celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity is all we have to do is change our diet. And many of the symptoms that we've had go away, or the disease processes that we've been suffering from actually stop and don't progress or go into remission. Because food is our medicine. We don't have to take medicine. We don't have to have surgery. It is the only thing that is going to make us better. So spend your money on super good, high quality food, organic, local as much as possible, because that's going to be what actually helps you heal your body and helps you heal faster and more completely. And I like to joke a little bit. Pay no attention to what I'm saying. Go back to what you were doing. Ignorance is bliss, right? Well, not if you have recurrent GI bleeds, or you suffer from migraine headaches, or you get misdiagnosed with Parkinson's, or you have bowel cancer and you've had to have your bowels resected and you might have a colostomy bag. Pay attention. I am talking to you. The interesting thing also about celiac disease in the media is that many actors and actresses and people in the public eye have gone on a gluten-free diet. And because of that, the media likes to portray it as a fad. And I'm not saying some people don't go on the gluten-free diet because it's a fad, but many of these people actually suffer from celiac disease themselves. They've just been identified. They might have better health care than you and I. They may have a more astute physician or naturopath or healthcare provider, and they find out sooner than you do that they have celiac disease. Several Olympians have found out they had celiac disease, and they're actually functioning on a very high level physically. But then when they actually find out that they have celiac disease, they go on to be even more exceptional in their sport or their field. And one of the Olympians said, you know what, if I felt so much better because I wasn't anemic anymore and I had more energy, I felt like I was taking steroids, but all I did was change my diet. So people should always have that option. And I'm, again, stymied about why physicians or why healthcare providers would try to dissuade anybody from feeling better. And more, you're going to find the products out there. There is a huge difference between really good, nutrient-dense, gluten-free or paleo products and what I like to call not very good gluten-free products that are cheap fillers, empty carbohydrates, so a lot of sugar, and not very nutrient dense at all. So if you're looking at something that has a lot of rice flour in it or tapioca starch or has a list of ingredients that you cannot pronounce or picture what they look like, or do you know where they come from, I steer away from those products as much as possible, and I encourage you to also. One of the other things I see a lot coming up is that wheat starch, and I know that's been okay in Europe. From my perspective, I would say, please avoid the wheat starch as much as possible or completely, because that wheat starch is an empty filler. It does nothing for you nutritionally. And while you may be replacing your gluten products with gluten-free products, going through that process, it's going to take you longer to get better. You are more at risk at that point of putting on weight that you don't want, because those are empty calories. And I don't even like to talk about calories, but I do like to talk about nutrient-dense foods versus nutrient-deficient foods. And a lot of the gluten-free products that are sold are nutrient-deficient, which means pound for pound, you're not getting very much out of them in the way of nutrition. Again, look back at that infographic and see where your money's going. I do like to support local companies. I do like to support companies that I can call up the people that own them and say, hey, is something changed with your product or your production? Because this happened, or I'd like this information. What can you tell me? there's accountability for those products. And I actually have people I can contact. When those companies get bought up by the corporations, I cease to buy those products because there is no accountability. I have no idea how that product then becomes produced. What are the standards? Many of those things will change, and I don't have time in my busy life to go chasing that information down. So again, I want everybody to be accountable that is producing anything I eat for the most part. And I do want to know where my money is going, and I'd love it if my money was staying local. Another thing I want you to be aware of is a lot of corporations or fast food chains will say they have gluten-free menus available. The corporations are saying that from the top down. By the time you get down to that counter, has the person that's working behind the counter been educated about what gluten-free means? Do they know about cross-contamination? I know companies think that they are on the bandwagon and they want a piece of that gluten-free pie from the money that is available because we are the largest untapped market in the world. But do they know what they're doing? Typically not, unless it's 100% designated gluten-free facility or restaurant. I do try to avoid those places because there's a number of ways to get contaminated or cross-contaminated. I've heard stories of people getting sick from eating at places they'd eaten before. It's just, even from a lettuce wrap. Gluten is everywhere, and you have to try to avoid it as much as possible and not assume that just because it's on the menu as a gluten-free option, that it's going to be gluten-free. There are many restaurants that say that, again, without really understanding what that means. Wheat-free does not equal gluten-free because of the fact that barley and rye and potentially oats are not included. And gluten-free does not always mean wheat-free. Again, remember that wheat starch? Celiac disease is a medical issue. It's a social issue. It has political implications, but it's also very political, and it's an economic issue. There's a lot of money involved in dissuading people from going on a gluten-free diet, from actually producing gluten-free food. There's many other factors that are involved in celiac disease. So I find it fascinating. So it's a medical issue, it's a social issue, it's definitely political, and it has economic implications. There are many, many companies that are producing really great gluten-free food or skin and hair products that are reliable. There's also the Gluten-Free Certification Organization, which is run by GIG, which is the Gluten Intolerance Group of North America, and they test all of their products that are certified to less than 10 parts per million. Now, that actually communicates really good information to me. The standard in the United States and in Europe is less than 20 parts per million. But I'm going to explain to you why I don't buy the products that are labeled gluten-free. Because let's just say you're eating 3 products for breakfast that are labeled gluten-free. But those products actually tested less than 20 parts per million. But let's just say they tested to 18 parts per million. So you're eating for breakfast enough gluten that would be slightly less than 60 parts per million. And then you do the same thing at lunch. And then you do the same thing at dinner. So over the course of the day, you're maybe getting 200 parts per million because the products that you're eating are less than 20 parts per million. But the cumulative effect of that gluten that you're getting is almost 200 or 200 plus parts per million. So do be very aware of that. That's why some people that are celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity don't get better on a gluten-free diet. Remember to vote very carefully with your dollar. You're very powerful. Let me assure you of that over and over and over again. You're extremely powerful, and you're communicating with how you spend your money and where you spend your money. Corporations do pay very close attention to that, and they're not necessarily interested in having you adopt a gluten-free diet and not eat wheat anymore, which is their product. So if you see some incorrect media coverage or you don't like the message that's being sent, send a letter, make a phone call, correct that media coverage, make them get it right. Always encourage people to get a faster and a correct diagnosis for non-celiac gluten sensitivity or celiac disease proper, and it must be taken seriously. People die from this. And They lose their organs, their gallbladders, their appendix, surgeries. All kinds of things happen to people before they get diagnosed with celiac disease. Children cease to grow. They have failure to thrive. They might have learning disabilities. And so the sooner we find people, the better off we all are as a society. Increase the awareness of celiac disease whenever you get a chance. Educate healthcare providers. As a nurse, I didn't know about celiac disease, but in this day and age, there should be no healthcare provider that thinks that celiac disease is a fad or say things like, celiac disease, I just don't believe in it. Well, you can believe in a religion and you can believe in a lot of other things, but celiac disease is a medically proven health issue that if doctors are not recognizing it, they need to get educated. And we need more safe restaurants and products. As I've said before, in Portland, Oregon, we have approximately 50 restaurants that are designated gluten-free. We live in food utopia here in the Pacific Northwest. So please come visit us if you get a chance in Portland, Oregon, or let me know where you live and what restaurants you have that you're really thankful that are providing safe gluten-free options or paleo options. Demand evidence and think critically. Don't be a victim about this. This is so easy just to eat gluten-free and be healthy. Sure, there's some health issues that you have to overcome sometimes, some questions that need to be answered. Find really reliable resources and just plow ahead. You're going to get better. That is the goal, right? Sometimes damage is done and there's not a thing we can do about it. But we really have to go forward and be proactive and positive. From day one, our mission statement at the Gluten-Free RN has been to educate people globally about gluten intolerance and celiac disease, empowering them to improve their health and quality of life with food. Our mission statement is still valid today. We're still working tirelessly, although I say tirelessly and then we do get tired, about educating people about non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease proper. And at this point, I'd like to thank everybody from around the world that is listening to the Gluten-Free RN podcast. And please refer to the podcast notes for further information and the resources we talked about. And thank you very much for the people that have left a review on iTunes or Stitcher, anywhere that you listen to this particular podcast, the Gluten-Free RN podcast, and for the comments that you have left me. They're very, very useful, and I very much appreciate them. So thank you very much for those of you that have already left a review and comments. And I do encourage you all over the world to please leave me a review and any comment that you have so that I can do a better job. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, please let me know. There is a veritable ton of information about non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. So hopefully over the next, 200 episodes, we'll cover a lot of that information. And in the meantime, don't forget to stay 100% gluten-free, or gluten zero, as my friend Dr. Rodney Ford says. Be healthy, educate the people around you, and be very aware of the information that you are getting from the media, especially if it talks disparagingly about a gluten-free diet or people with celiac disease. There's so much work to be done. So join me for the next episode of the Gluten-Free RN. In the meantime, have fun, eat at least gluten-free if not paleo, and stay healthy. Bye.